Hello everyone, this is Steven again, and in this video I'm going to show another very typical animation exercise where it's a fallen leaf or a feather in this case, where it's falling and moving sort of side to side as it kind of gently moves to the ground. It's a very typical animation exercise that's often done in 2D animation and 3D animation as well. I wanted to kind of show this and how you can attach an object to a path. And this can be done for anything that can follow a path, like an airplane or a helicopter, or in this case, it's fallen leaf or feather. And you could, to a certain degree, you could do this for fish swimming, right? And so what this does is it follows this path. I've got this object aligned to this path. And in this particular example, I don't have it rotating. It's following the direction of the path. And I'll switch to the perspective camera to kind of show this. So it's using the path for its sort of direction and rotation right now. I'm going to do a second part that's going to talk about how to get it to rotate, but you can see it's just sort of following along that path and how it rotates. And just kind of understand this, the paths in Maya that you create have sort of an up direction, and this fallen leaf or feather will follow that up direction. And I'll show you in the next video how we can kind of manipulate that and have it rotate around. But you can see it sort of banks a little bit as the path moves. And so it's going to try to maintain sort of an upward direction for the object, but it tries to sort of follow it much like a roller coaster, right? You can look at this as sort of a roller coaster following this path. Right. So the first thing that we have to do is create this path, and I have another video that shows how to do that. So I'm not going to go fully into how to create the path, but I'll kind of quickly draw one out so that we can kind of get the idea of, kind of how to work with it and how to manipulate it, right? And I use the Bezier tool. You can kind of see that this is using the Bezier tool. When I select it and I right click, I can actually go to Control Vertex and I can see these Bezier handles. And I find that this is a little bit better and easier to control for this particular curve and to kind of get the roundness of it. And just so you realize, when we're looking at this, I've already built a shot camera to view this for rendering, and I've rendered it out. But you can see it from one perspective, and it looks like it just kind of goes back and forth. But when you look at it from above, it's making circular motions, which is really what it would do. It wouldn't just kind of go one way and then immediately back out. When you see this sort of thing in a 2D animation exercise where it's a fallen leaf or feather, it looks like it's going back and forth, but really in reality, it's actually moving around in a circle. It's getting pushed around in a circle. So when you design your path like this, make sure that it's sort of going in a circular motion. The other thing you'll notice is if you try to make too quick of bends, the fallen leaf or the feather or whatever it is that you're animating on a path, it's going to hit that and then kind of immediately come back, and it's going to do a quick twist and it won't look quite right. So you got to get this thing lined up so it makes sort of circular patterns or oval patterns and not just making a quick bend. Like this might be a little too aggressive, but when we get to that point, we kind of get this here. You can kind of see it does this nice little turn, right? It's the most aggressive one, but it'll look okay on the camera. If you get it, very tight and it, is making a tighter turn, it won't look quite right. And the other reason this looks a little bit better is it's sort of away from the camera when it turns back around, right? So I'm going to make a new scene to start this up. And I'm not going to save. And I am referencing in these models, although they're not fully rigs, you don't have control curves to make them rigs. I'm going to go ahead and start that as it were a rig, right? Because it's the same kind of idea that I want to sort of reuse this animation in there. So I'm going to right click over here and I'm going to go down to reference and I'm going to create reference. When the reference window pops up, I'm going to choose feather. There is a leaf here, and if you use the models that I'm providing, you'll see the leaf or the feather, one of the two you can use. And then in the source images directory, make sure that you're putting the texture file. So this is the feather texture file or the leaf texture file, right? So I'm going to go back to scenes. I've already set my project. It's set to this name of this project. So that's why when I select these, I can just automatically go to one of the folders to see what they contain because the project is already set. So I'm going to choose feather. I'm going to click reference and it's going to bring that feather in. And then you're going to see that it has a texture and all this. If you don't see the texture on there, you can just press 6 on the keyboard and then go to lighting and show two-sided lighting and it should show up. it was on and it was enabled, so you'll probably see it from both sides, right? So that's how you can get it to show up. And very quickly, I'm going to go to Curves and Surfaces, and I'm going to use the Bezier Curve tool. If you roll over these, you can kind of see you have the EP Curve tool, a Pencil Curve tool, detach, insert knot, all these other things. But then this one that looks like you have Bezier handles on it, that's the Bezier Curve tool. And I can select that, and then I can click and click and click and click and click. And if I click and drag, you're going to get handles, right? So I'm going to undo. I'm going to go back and I'm going to undo that one. And again, I'm setting this up so X is left to right and Z is back and forth, which is very typical. X is usually left to right and Z is moving back and forth and Y is up and down. So I'm going to click once here, but I'm going to hold down. I'm going to click and drag out, and you're going to get a handle. Then I'm going to come over here, click and drag out, and you're going to get a handle. So that's how you can get the handle automatically on your curves when you're using the Bezier curve tool, right? If you just click, you're going to get a corner point. So I'm going to click again here and just drag out, and then click again here and drag out, click again here and drag out, click. And again, I go through this in sort of in depth in another video where I discuss sort of in depth how to modify this. But I'm just sort of quickly creating this. So just click Q on the keyboard to get out of that Bezier tool. And I've got this laid out. And you'll notice that it's just flat on the grid because that's how it works. It needs sort of that 2D grid space to first make it out. So there's a couple ways you can make this a little bit. Change the depth or the height of it. And that's, I can either right click and go to Control Vertex, grab each one and press W and move them up. Right? And if I want to do the fine tuning, I can do that too. And I can go ahead and select all these points, right? Just kind of go to each one of them and select them all. Just make sure that I'm selecting across each point along the path. And also realize that the very first one that I clicked, that's the starting position. The last one I clicked is the ending position. The reason why is when you start the curve out this way, it's going to, when I attach the object to the curve, it's going to start at the very first point that I laid down. Just important to realize. If it goes reverse, if you ended up, starting with this one and then going back up to this one and then using that as your start point, you have to reverse the curve. So it's a little bit harder to do that, or it's an extra step, I should say. It's not impossible. It's just an extra step, and it's not something I'm going to show here. So I have all these selected, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to deselect the last one, and then I'm just going to start moving it up a little bit, right? And you can see that I'm pulling that one up, and then I'm going to slowly shift select the other ones as I move up just a little bit to deselect them as I kind of move everything else up, right? So that's, in this way I can kind of move up everything together. And I didn't select that one, but I think I'm going to do this so it does a little loop there. And then I can shift select that one and then move it up, right? And I don't want it to be too large because I need to be able to see this leaf or feather, whatever's along the path. So if you make the path too large, you're going to have this tiny little feather or tiny little leaf on this path, and you're not going to be able to see it, right? So the idea here is that I want to be able to kind of get it close enough to the camera to see it, but also give it some space to kind of move around. Right, so I'm going to move this here, and I'm going to go ahead and make my shot camera. So I go to camera here, and I'm going to type in shot camera, and I'll leave it at shot camera 1. That's fine. Right, and I want to be able to switch to that camera so that I can get a good view on my scene. Turn on the resolution gate. So that's the film gate. That's the resolution gate. That shows me what's going to render. I can also see that my render settings are not ideal, not what I want. So I'm going to go up to the render settings. I'm going to scroll down. Doesn't matter what render I'm on. I'm going to scroll to the bottom and I'll make it the HD 1080, the full HD. And I usually change my renderable camera to shot camera right now, but you can do that later before you render. But that's going to be the camera that will render. Right, and now I can line this up. Whoop. There we go. And I can kind of get this lined up so it looks, again, right click, Control Vertex to move these things. And so I want that to kind of land maybe right there. And then I can manipulate this and then bring this up. So it kind of, I want it to sort of start up in this corner, and then I'm going to bring this over maybe. And I'm just sort of lining it up so that it sits in my scene. And so the feather isn't going outside of my scene and then coming back to it, right? And I've got this one, like a gust of air is going to push it up, and I'm going to grab this one and sort of bring it over here. And I'm just kind of looking at this in a 2D fashion right now to kind of get an idea of how I want this path to look. And this one, I'm going to grab each handle. And this is why I like the Bezier curve tool, is you can kind of drag these out, and it acts much like you would use the animation curves in the graph editor, right? You can kind of grab these handles and shape out the curve a little bit and kind of get a better idea of where this is going to be, right? Now, I don't want to go too low with this because I want it to kind of get pretty close to the ground, but then it's going to stop when it hits the ground. And this one should still be on the ground based on I moved every other point except for that one, right? And I'm going to grab this. Let's twist that a little bit like this. So it's going to go down and then kind of come up, and it's going to get pushed up in the air. And I'm going to change this a little bit. I think that's pretty good. And then let me fix that. And I want sort of nice, gentle curves here, right? So it's going to get kind of pushed around, and it might speed up and slow down. But I think that's pretty good. I'm going to switch back to the perspective camera. And now I'm going to look at the curves from sort of front to back, like in the Z axis, right? So it's starting back here, which is kind of nice. And I can move it forward. As long as I don't move it out, I'm still going to be within the confines of my shot camera. And I don't like this bend, so I'm going to pull this out a little bit, right? And then I'm going to pull this in just a little bit so that's kind of more of a straight or an angled trajectory when it gets closer to the ground. Let's move this. And again, I'm using the move tool. I'm just selecting the handles and using the move tool to kind of get that going the direction that I want it to go. Right, and then move this back here, right? Move this around maybe a little bit. And I don't like how this bends here either, so I'm going to kind of get that a little bit more rounded, right? And then the same thing here. I think that that's a little bit more of an aggressive turn, so I'm going to move this way and get that just kind of nice swirling movements from the kind of the top. And now when I switch back to my other camera, you'll notice that it looks like it's just kind of going back and forth, but it's actually going forward and back from the camera. It's not just going left to right, right? So, but it looks like a nice kind of gentle arc, right? That's how I kind of get my sort of path going first. Let me switch back to the perspective camera, right? And now I'm going to press Q on the keyboard and select the curve, or right click and go to object mode. So I'm just sort of on the curve. And now I want to attach this object to this curve. Now the first thing that I want to do is actually I'm going to set my timeline up so I have like plenty of space to work from. And I'm going to base sort of the movement from the start of this to the end of this on the distance in the timeline. So I'm going to set it to 480 frames just because this is going to go fairly slow. It's not going to move extremely fast. So I'm going to have it set like that to begin with, and I can adjust it and modify it later. Right, so I'm on frame 1. I select the object. I'm going to shift select the curve, right? And then I'm going to go to the animation menu set. And I do this because this is where all the menus are for animation. So you see, key, playback, visualize, deform, constrain. So this, how I'm going to add this to the path is under the constrain menu. So I'm going to go to constrain. I'm going to go down to motion paths, and then I'm going to go to attach motion path, and I'm going to go to the option box. Now in the attach to motion paths options, I'm going to make sure time slider is selected. I could choose start. I could choose start and end and set that. So if I wanted to start at 1 and end at frame 30, I could do that. But I want time slider, so it starts here and ends here. So it's going to start on the path at the very beginning on frame 1. At frame 480, it's going to be at the end. So it's just going to kind of follow that path all the way along. The next thing I want to make sure is that follow is turned on, because I want this feather to follow along the path and rotate with the path. If I don't have that on, the feather or leaf or whatever you have along the path is just going to remain one direction the entire thing. It's not going to rotate around, right? And so if it gets to a bank, it's not going to follow like a plane would. It would still be pointing the same direction as it rotated around. Now you might want that, but in this case, I'm going to choose follow because then I'm going to be able to kind of manipulate this afterwards. I don't need to do anything else. Make sure the world up type is vector. The up axis is Y as it normally is. The front axis for this object, this particular object, is X. So I'm going to leave it at its default, right? And then you don't have to worry about anything else. And I'm just going to go ahead and attach, which will close the window and attach this to the path. Now you'll see that this would be the X direction of my object, right? It's going to follow along the path. If I just press play right now, you're going to see it's going to follow along. It slowly starts out. It sort of follows like a roller coaster would, or an airplane or whatever. It follows along that path and just keeps going, right? And then it's going to go eventually all the way to the bottom, and then it's going to kind of slow down at the end. So it's got some sort of natural slow in and slow out because it's been added when those keyframes are added. It's just set like that by my default tangent types, right? So my default tangent type right now is either automatic or spline. I'm going to go to Window, I'm going to go to Animation Editors, and I'm going to go to Graph Editor just to look at this really quick. All right. So you can see there's the first keyframe, it's on frame 1. There's the last keyframe, it's on frame 480. So attaching it to the curve did that. If you don't see this when you selected the object, right? So if you select this, you're not going to see keyframes. If you select the object, you might see it. If you do not see it, you're going to have to come over here to the channel box and find the motion path one and select that. And then when you bring that up, it should show you that curve. So usually it'll show when you select the object, but again, sometimes when you select it, it's not going to exactly show it. So select that motion path and you're going to see that it keyframed the U value on the motion path 1. Right? If you have more than one motion path, it's going to be motion path 1, motion path 2, motion path 3. But in this case, it's the first motion path we created in this scene. So it says motion path 1. You'll see what is keyed is the U value. So automatically when I set it along the path, it set a key at 1, it set a key at 480. And those keys are on the U value of the motion path. You'll notice the feather has these yellow tabs on it, or next to it, this little yellow marker. What it means is the translates and the rotates are controlled by this U value, right? So when follow is on for those attributes, it's going to follow along and it's determining its rotation based on the rotation of this curve. If follow is off, you wouldn't see these yellow tab markers here. That just indicates that it's controlled by something else and you're not going to key these. So the difference of path animation is I don't select the object. I don't go to a location, select the object, press S on the keyboard. It wouldn't work. You're going to break it if you do that because the keys are going to override this and then it's going to go off the path. So I'm going to go ahead and close this. So I'm going to scrub down here. If I have the U value selected, I could press S on the keyboard, but if I just select the object without doing that and press S, you're going to see that it sort of keys these and these turn green, which means it's going to stop going along the path. So don't just press S on the keyboard to key it, but what you can do is sort of go down, let's say to go down to 110, or I'm going to go to right where it just finishes the corner. So it just rounded sort of this corner. I'm going to select the motion path 1, select the U value. I can right click and go to key selected, or with that selected, as long as you have the options. If I go to preferences, and if I go down to time slider, if the sync timeline display and the sync selection in graph editor are selected, then when you select that U value, you can press S to key it. So the other way again is, let's go to about right here, is to right click key selected, or as long as that U value is selected and I go, let's say here somewhere and press S, it will key that. If I have something else selected, it's going to key that. So that's how that works, if you don't already know. So when I select that, you're going to see the keys. I'm going to get down to about right here. I'm going to sort of key that again, maybe right in here, right? And I'm just going to kind of look at where these keys are happening. So I'm going to put one about right there, and then there's one about right there, and there's one about right there. So just about every curve. So what I'm going to be able to do is control when it speeds up and slows down. And it doesn't have to be exactly on every curve, but if you want to modify these, you select one and you press the T key, and you'll see a little yellow diamond appear. And if you just drag it along here, I can adjust where that happens. Notice it doesn't change the frame. This is the frame number that key is happening. It's happening on 144. But what I'm doing is I'm adjusting the timing. It's going to take 144 frames to go from there to there. right? So I'm not changing. If I move it down here, it's going to take 144 frames to get to here. So I'm adjusting where the timing along the path by moving this marker. And if I keep selecting each one, I can adjust. Now, if you try to move it too far, sometimes this happens. And it's just the way that it works here is if I try to move up, it's going to try to pop it because I'm moving it around, right? So sometimes it'll pop when you don't think that it should, but it's thinking that you want to move it over here. So it's pretty dynamic in that way, but it also can kind of get you into trouble because I don't want it up here, I want it down here. So I always want to make sure that since this is following along a path and it's going to keep moving forward, one thing to realize is that if a higher number is up here, it's going to get down to that point and then it's going to go back up the path, right? And there's another thing about the graph editor that could make it go reverse. So I've got my main keys set. I have the feather following along the path. I have these sort of markers positioned. Now I'm going to go back into the graph editor. I'm going to kind of modify them and edit them. By the way, if I want to delete one of these markers, I could just select it. And if you right click and go to control vertex, you can go to points along the curve and modify the handles, but I can also delete them to get rid of one, right? I could just select it. The same thing here, I can select one of these markers and just press delete and it's gone. So that's how I can kind of get rid of them. And I can add more just again by moving down, moving this down to where I need it to, and then going and editing the U value, right? So I can kind of select U value. The other thing about the T key, I still was on the T key, but if you're on the move tool, don't move. You're not going to be able to move this feather or leaf or whatever object is on this path, right? So if you press the T key, you can actually drag it and move it, right, along that path. So I'm going to go to the beginning and I'll show you a neat little trick here. So let's say I don't want this feather to be oriented this way on my path. So what I can do is just use this rotation tool, making sure that you're on the T key, not the normal rotation tool, because that won't work. We won't be able to key it that way. But just press the T key and then rotate this. It's a manipulator tool, and you'll be able to kind of rotate it using the manipulator tool. So if I set it this way and I kind of set my orientation that way, now it's going to kind of keep that rotation when it gets back up here, right? So I can kind of move back out, and then you're going to see it changes the start point of that orientation, and it's going to kind of maintain that orientation on there like it's, sort of like a wing or whatever. So I can set it at the very beginning, and I can kind of rotate it this way so it's not like at a perfect 90 degree to the curve, right? And then it'll stop there. And like I said, in the next video, I'll go into the refinement and talk about how you can animate those rotations. But the first part, we're just going to get it to animate and do some slow in and slow out along the path. So the next step, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Windows, and I'm going to go to Animation Editors and Graph Editor again. And I'm going to look at these points along the curve and realize that, again, this is the start, this is the end. It's always going in this direction. If the curve goes down, if it starts to go the other direction, the feather or leaf or object that's on the path is going to go opposite. It's going to go back up the path. So when I start to add slow in and slow out to this, when I start to pull this down, if I pull it down too far, you're going to notice when I get to this point, I'm going to pull this down so you can see it. You're going to notice when it gets to this point, it starts to go back up the path. And that's because this is going down. So this is showing you from the start of the path to the end of the path. So it's going up, it's going down the path, and then it's going to go back up the path, and it's going to go back down. So important thing to know about this specifically is I don't want it to go back up the path. And I don't even want it to get to stop, because if you have it flat, it's going to go, the slow in, slow out will kind of have it stop right there, and then it'll pick up speed again. And it doesn't look quite right when you do that. So we're going to kind of scrub back here, and I'll show that. So it comes here, and it's going to come to pretty much a dead stop and then start up again. So they can't be super flat. You're going to have a little bit of an angle, but this is adding slow into that point and slow out of that point. And so I can vary this sort of along the path a little bit, and then I can tweak it a little bit when I have it moving. So I'm going to do this, but I'm going to also bring this one up a little bit because I want this to go super slow. And then I'm going to grab this. And by the way, if you can't pull your handles out, here's how to fix this, right? And again, I don't want this. I want this to be kind of flattish, right? So the first thing is you can't I've already got them unlocked. Like I've got the tangent weights unlocked, right? But if you still can't drag them further out and you want to, you could select the whole curve, right click, and go to weighted tangents. And then when you do that, you can actually select the handle and drag it out. You might notice that one side of the handle is a little bit longer than the other. And so if you want to reorient that, just choose automatic for the keyframe. And then I can kind of get that going again, right? So again, that's automatic and it'll set it up like this. And then I can kind of drag those out, right? And it's usually set to where, you know, sort of this handle will dictate how this one behaves a little bit, right? So I'm going to pull that down just a little bit. And then I can turn that to automatic if I want to. It's going to realign it. But these are now set up so I can kind of drag the tangent handles away from each one of these, right? And again, I don't want it to be super flat. I'm just going to get it to slow down just a little bit on each one. As a reminder, the more vertical that the animation curves go, the faster the speed of the object. The more flat or more horizontal the animation curves, the slower it's going to go, or it's even going to stop, right? So if these are completely flat, it's going to stop right there and then speed out. So if this is like this, it's going to go super fast in that place. So you'll see right there that it's sped way up, right? So I don't want that, and I don't want this, and I definitely don't want that because I don't want it going back up the curve. So I'm going to set it somewhere like that. Right, so you're going to see this gradual sort of, it's going to get to this, it's going to slow down, it's going to get to this, it's slow down. So I'm using those to kind of add my slow in and slow out along this curve that I created. So now when I play it through, you're going to see that it sort of gets to that point, slows down, speeds up. And I don't like necessarily, I can just kind of play around with it. I didn't like where it sort of sped up right here. I was trying to play it, I was actually trying to scrub it while I was playing. So I think it was right here, and I'm going to just grab that and move that up just a little bit. And maybe this one just a little bit. Let's see how that looks. Right, and play it through there and kind of see that it sort of slows down there and speeds up, but it doesn't slow way down, right? It's just adding a little bit of slow in and slow out. Then when it gets to the end, it just really kind of settles to a stop, and it starts out slow too, right? So you're going to get to this point, it's going to kind of slow down, it's going to speed up. And again, I don't think I liked how slow it went, so I'm going to adjust this just a little bit more. Just drag that up. And then let's go back. Go back to the very beginning and then press play. And you're going to see it kind of slows down there and picks up speed as it drops down. Slows down there, maybe picks up speed there, slows down. And maybe I want to slow that down a little bit in between those previous ones. So I can actually just grab that and move it up and down, right? I can adjust it that way, right? And so now let's go back a little bit and watch that again. And so I kind of wanted it to slow down, maintain a little bit more being slow right into here, and then speed up. It's going to speed up right there, slow down, speed up, slow down, and then slow to a stop, right? So that's kind of the idea that I'm kind of getting that going, right? So now I've got this sort of slow in, slow out. I've got it following along the path. That's pretty good. If I want to change the time where it actually hits this marker, that you'll see that frame number 287 is the frame number of this marker where it gets to that point. If I want to change the timing, I could just, again, go over to the motion path 1, and you could see the keyframes here, and I could just go and hold down Shift, select it, and drag it around. Make sure I'm right on top of it. Or you can hold down Shift and drag across it, and then I can kind of move it around. So when I have that marker selected, I'm going to go over to the attribute editor, and you can see this time value for the position marker shape 7, right? So that's the 7th one that I added. You can go here and look at the transform, but really what I need to find is this second tab where it says position marker shape. And then I can change this time value to say 290. I hit return to make sure it accepted it, but you'll notice that didn't update yet. You just have to click off of that marker to get it to update. So the same thing here, if it's at 221, and let's say I wanted to change it to 230, hit enter or tab to accept it. And then when I click into the scene, you'll notice that it updates that. So that doesn't change the location of the marker, that changes the time when it hits that marker. Now I can also change that in the graph editor. So if I go to animation editors and the graph editor, and then make sure that I go over to the channel box motion path, I can see that motion path. You can move them left to right, right? I can move them left to right to change their timing. But this is going to be the one that's right here at 290. You'll notice that it doesn't change the number on that until you click into the scene. The same thing. If you select your object, go to the motion path one, I can even select the U value, but if I'm on motion path one, you'll see the curves. And then when you update here, if you change the value in time this way, and then come down here, you're going to notice that should be this one. And then when I click here, it will update that, right? So that's just kind of how that works. It just until you click off of that, it's not going to update the sort of frame marker. But these are just for your reference to know when it's hitting. And then other than that, this is the first stage that I'm at for animating this. The only other thing I want to do is I want to add a flat plane for the ground because I don't want to just treat the grid like it's going to be a ground. So if I render this out, you're actually going to see a ground. So I'm going to go ahead and click this flat plane right here. So I just went to the poly modeling, went to the flat plane. I have interactive creation on, so I have to drag it out. If you don't have the interactive creation turned on, then it's just going to make a flat plane in the middle and you can kind of scale it up. But what I end up doing is sort of drawing it out. And then I can go over to the attribute editor and go to the poly plane tab. And then I can kind of set my width and height. I'll set it to 20 by 20, or I could set it wider, kind of the width wise, a little bit wider. And then it's 30 by 20, right? You can also scale it up, but I find this is a lot easier to just kind of come in here to the original construction and change the height and width right there. And that way, if you go to the plane, you don't see a different scale. It's actually in the original construction of this geometry, right? So the next thing I want to do is I'm just going to apply a color to it and just make it really quick. I'm going to right click. I'm going to go down to assign new material and let that go. And then when I get here, you're going to notice that these are the standard Maya shaders, and I'm going to just go to the Arnold shaders because I'm using Arnold, and I'm going to choose the AI standard surface, and I'm just going to go to that color. If you choose a regular Maya material, it just doesn't work too well in Arnold. It'll still work, but I just choose an AI standard surface, and that's the Arnold rendering material. And I'm going to just choose the color. I'm going to click the color swatch. And then I can choose, say, like a green and then sort of darken it up if I want to kind of don't make it so brilliant and bold. And then that way, when I look through my shot camera, I actually have this ground plane where this feather is going to kind of fall and stop on, right? So I don't want to use my grid to make sure that it does that. So I just want to make sure I have that ground so it makes it look like the feather is falling onto the ground. But that's this first step. And again, like I said, in the next video, I'm going to add some orientation to this. And you can see, like right now, it's kind of rotating around. You can kind of still see the coordinates of the object and how it's rotating around and kind of moving back and forth and changing speed and eventually slowing and stopping at the end. So I hope this helps and good luck with that. Hopefully you'll have a nice, good looking animation with a feather leaf falling to the ground.